Hey y'all. So we're going to wrap this all up today, covering the female reproductive system. First off, don't forget that the male repro is on a previous recording. Today we're going to focus on the oogenesis process, and oogenesis is the process of creating the secondary oocytes that the female releases at ovulation. So when we're looking here at oogenesis or oogenesis, either way, you need to understand it's got similar components that the male had. It's got a mitotic stage where we're going to take a stem cell, and mitosis, mitotic, and we're going to take a stem cell. We're going to make a copy, and we're going to use that copy to then undergo this cellular division to create the eggs, which are properly called the oocyte. Specifically, the one that's released at ovulation is the secondary oocyte. So, first off, in males, don't forget that this began at puberty and it didn't stop until death. But in females, this is a completely different process. This begins before birth. So, the mitotic process, the mitosis, where the stem cell divided and made a copy, that happens well before birth. And then the oocytes, the primary oocytes is what they're called, these are going to enter the first stage of meiosis. And before birth, this is going to be stopped. So, a female is born with her eggs, her oocytes, all of them stuck in meiosis 1. It's just kind of been paused in the middle of it. So, again, we start with this stem cell called an oogonia, and the stem cell divides by mitosis, and it makes a copy called the primary oocyte, and it enters meiosis 1. The primary oocyte kind of pauses there in meiosis 1, and that stops. The female is born, and at puberty, the sex hormones start to cause some of these follicles and some of these primary oocytes to begin to develop each month. And so at puberty, the ovarian cycle begins. And the ovarian cycle is the process of taking a group of primordial follicles, converting them into primary follicles, and then choosing for the best primary follicle to create the only secondary follicle that will be released at ovulation. And so this process doesn't begin until the sex hormones are introduced at puberty. Once they're introduced, then the ovarian cycle begins, and it will continue once a month. The ovarian cycle will release an oocyte until menopause, until the end of menstruation, the end of releasing eggs. And so this is completely different. So again, let's kind of look at this. Let's talk about this process. Here is the mitotic division, mitosis. The oogonium or oogonia is going to divide. It's going to create the primary oocyte, and the primary oocyte is then going to enter into meiosis 1. And so it's going to enter into meiosis 1, but it's going to be stopped until puberty. And so somewhere around right here, it's going to be paused. And meiosis 1 is not complete until after puberty. Once a month, this process here continues. And so once a month, the primary oocyte finishes meiosis 1 and becomes a secondary oocyte and enters meiosis 2. But I want you to understand the secondary oocyte is paused in the middle of meiosis 2. So what is released at ovulation, the secondary oocyte, is actually not finished with its meiosis and with its entire division. Only if fertilization occurs will meiosis 2 be completed. This is a fail-safe mechanism. This is to make sure that only a human sperm can fertilize a human egg and that it will develop. And so the split second when that sperm fertilizes that egg, right before it actually fertilizes, when that sperm unites with that egg, that's the trigger for the egg to finish meiosis 2. And once it finishes meiosis 2, that sperm is right there to inject its DNA and to bind that DNA and create that zygote, that brand new first cell of that new organism. Now, I want you to notice this division, though. We start with 1 and we end with 1. This is not like our typical meiosis. This is not like males where we started with 1 and we ended with 4, right? And so here we start with 1, we end with 1, and that's completely different than we saw in males. These 3 extra cells that tend to be gone, either the first polar body, it may divide, it may not, but these things are called polar bodies. These extra cells that in other meiosis, they would actually become daughter cells. Instead, we want to put all the effort into just one major secondary oocyte, just one cell that will be released. And so as a result, the other 3 are lost. Okay, so let's look at this again. The ovarian cycle kind of begins with primordial follicles inside of the female. Now, again, in the ovaries, before birth, a female develops these primordial follicles, and inside of them, there are primary oocytes. So, the primary oocytes inside of these primordial follicles, these are what's going to undergo that division. They're stuck in meiosis 1. Again, those polar bodies are non-functional cells produced during meiosis for the female. So, again, non-functional cells just made during meiosis. The secondary oocyte is what develops, and this is what's released at ovulation at day 14 of the cycle. And so the secondary oocyte is stuck in meiosis 2, as I mentioned in that picture. And so not until fertilization happens does meiosis 2 completed, split second before the spermatozoa fuse with the secondary oocyte and form that zygote. So this is different. Female begins at birth, she pauses, and then at puberty, she begins a selective process of continuing this maturation or continuing the development of the oocyte, but it's not completely finished whenever she releases that oocyte. And so this is very unique. Instead of starting meiosis and just going till it's finished, the female is going to begin it before birth, and it doesn't complete itself until actual fertilization. So that's completely unique. The ovarian cycle has 3 main phases. Here we see it. Basically, ovulation is really kind of the defining moment in the ovarian cycle. Before ovulation and after ovulation are kind of really this whole cycle is based after. So the first 14 days, the ovarian cycle is approximately 28 days. For the first 14 days, the follicles are developing, and inside the oocytes are developing, right? So we're going to take these oocytes, we're going to move them into that secondary oocyte phase and only form one secondary oocyte, and then that's going to develop inside of that tertiary or Graafian follicle that we saw in lab. Now, during this stage, estrogen is the hormone that you need to be aware of. It's made by these follicles, and it is controlling the production of the follicle and the oocyte. So it's actually made by the cells. Now, at the point where the secondary oocyte is released, that is called ovulation. Again, this is a defined moment in time. And so the split second where the egg is released is ovulation. And so defined before that is the follicular phase, and after that is defined as the luteal phase. So the ovulatory phase is caused by a spike in luteinizing hormone. So luteinizing hormone, we're going to mention that again for the female like we mentioned for the male, and talk about what its function is. And its mainly function is to release the egg at ovulation. After the egg is released, then the ovaries enter what's referred to as the luteal phase. The first 14 days, the first 2 weeks were about developing the oocyte. Now that the oocyte has been released, there's no need to start developing the next oocyte. That's what the first 14 days are for. Now the ovary wants to try to maintain the uterus in case there's any fertilization, in case that zygote develops and an embryo begins to develop. And so the last 14 days are while the endometrium is being enriched and being kind of thickened, and this again is in case there's going to be development. This is from a different hormone called progesterone, and progesterone comes from that corpus luteum. And progesterone before gestation, before the baby's in the belly, is really what that describes, right? So this luteal phase, maintaining the uterus in case there's development. Now, at the end of this luteal phase, towards the end, if there's no implantation, if there's no fertilization, and there's no zygote that implants in that endometrium, then the luteal phase stops. Progesterone stops being released, and at that point, then the endometrium stops being supported, so it's to release from the inner wall of the uterus, and it starts to be removed out of the female's body, and that is what's called menstruation. So menstruation is just kind of the end of this process, and so this is where the endometrium is removed, and for the next month, it's going to be kind of rebuilt a little bit, right? So we're going to reform that super nutritive rich endometrium in the luteal phase of the next month, and then this way it gives that cell, that zygote, the best chance of development with the freshest, best types of material. Okay, at that point, then the follicular phase begins again, and the whole process repeats itself. Again, here's what we've already mentioned. The follicular phase is the first 2 weeks. The primordial follicles become primary follicles. There's a group of primary follicles. The follicular cells are going to produce fluid, and they're going to produce the hormone estrogen. So they're going to start to wrap that oocyte with more fluid. Eventually, the secondary follicle, there's only one of these. Remember, there's multiple primaries, and there's to only be one secondary unless you have twins that run in your family, and that's something different. And so secondary follicle is where the primary oocyte is kind of continuing its development. Eventually it reaches the tertiary or the Graafian follicle. Some people put mature follicle on the lab test, which is correct. And so this tertiary follicle is what releases the oocyte at ovulation. And again, ovulation, and here we kind of see some of those follicles. Here, ovulation is when the oocyte is released, and this is due to a spike in luteinizing hormone, LH. At that point, the luteinizing hormone triggers that luteal phase. So the luteal phase is where that Graafian follicle or tertiary follicle, it kind of collapses, and it forms this new endocrine structure called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is now making progesterone. So we turned off the estrogen and activated the progesterone for the second 2 weeks. So the luteal phase is dominated by progesterone. And again, it's maintaining that uterine lining in case there's fertilization. If there's fertilization, then as I mentioned, then that endometrium lining is removed, and that is the process of menstruation. Here you can see ovulation. You can actually see the secondary oocyte being released from the surface of the ovary. Now, to wrap this up, here are the female sex hormones. First, again, we have Guns N' Roses hormone, and this is the hormone stimulates act. No, just kidding. GnRH, gonadotropic releasing hormone. Gonadotropic releasing hormone triggers the release of FSH and LH. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone, and here these two are really defined for the female, not for the male. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, this stimulates the follicles to develop the oocytes, right? Pretty obvious. Luteinizing hormone, as I've kept mentioning over and over, this is what triggers ovulation. So these two are really kind of described as far as female function. Luteinizing hormone triggers the luteal phase by causing ovulation. Don't forget estrogen first 2 weeks, maintaining, helping FSH, and then progesterone for the second 2 weeks, and this is maintaining that uterus. Also, I want to mention prolactin and oxytocin are used for breast milk production and breast production, and so prolactin helps to create the milk, and then oxytocin helps to release the milk. Some of these female sex hormones, the estrogens especially, are going to provide secondary sex characteristics, and so some of the secondary sex characteristics include the formation of breasts, right? Because breast tissue is really just kind of adipose tissue in very specific regions of the body. And so it's this hormone that kind of dictates where that adipose is going to be deposited. And so that is one of those secondary sex characteristics. Another one would be that females are shorter, right, because of how estrogen affects bone growth, there at lengthwise growth. Another one could be kind of the opposite of some of the males, right? So lack of hair on the face, a higher pitched voice, less muscle mass. Okay, so these things are other kind of characteristics of these sex hormones. They're just in other places in the body. Now, at that point, that's where we're going to end our semester. I'm not going to cover anything dealing with development. That would just take too much, and I just don't think we have time. And so we're going to end on this picture of the Death Star and all of the TIE fighters and the X-Wings having their battle. No, just kidding. Look at that. There is an egg. Isn't that amazing? So here is a scanning electron micrograph. I don't really see how blown up it is. I don't see it mentioned there. But here you can see an egg, and you can see these hundreds of thousands of spermatozoa that are fighting to penetrate that egg, right? When the right to merge their DNA with that egg's DNA and create the next species, the next organism. When we look at this, I always think this kind of looks like sprouts, right? So it kind of looks like sprouts you might put on your salad or a sandwich or something, maybe in some pad thai, you know. And so here, this is one of my favorite pictures. It kind of looks like something in outer space, but it's actually something microscopic inside of the female body. So, all right, y'all, this has been an amazing semester. I am extremely proud of y'all. I have truly had an amazing time teaching y'all in both fashions, especially in class where we get to hang out and kind of be a family. You guys, my 211ers, you guys are super important to me every semester. But for some reason, these past semesters, I've really had some great students in 210, and now you guys in 211, and I'm really going to miss a lot of y'all. So thank you guys for making this easier for me and for being awesome to me. You know, being awesome to me makes me want to be more awesome to y'all. And so you guys really deserve the best because you guys have been some of my greatest students ever. So thank y'all much for putting up with me and seeing me as a mentor and a professor. Thank you for the kind words that you said. Thank you for the kind emails, and for the frustrating emails so that I can help you so that you're not quite as upset about it. But you guys have been awesome. Let's go finish this semester strong. Let's go kick its butt. Let's get some great grades. And then we can just relax and enjoy our summer, or, you know, head in, take a little break, and head into summer session. So, all right. If y'all have any questions, please feel free to email me. And otherwise, this is it. Love you, mean it.